Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the state of North Carolina and President Biden's priority here to make this state a top battleground in the 2024 presidential election and how it pretty much defies a lot of the rhetoric we've been seeing about the Democratic Party playing only defense. Now, North Carolina serves at a unique point of interest for me, for political pundits, for the Biden campaign, for the Trump campaign, because it has long been a state that has been competitive, but also very reliably Republican. Back in the 2020 presidential election, President Biden lost this state to President Trump by 1.3%. Democrats had not won the state since 2008, and prior to that, going all the way back to 1976. North Carolina has been a Republican stronghold despite how close it has been, and so for many, people, Donald Trump and Joe Biden in a rematch election, they expect North Carolina to vote nearly the exact same. In fact, many political pundits expect North Carolina, amongst many other battleground states, to vote either the same way they did in 2020 or vote worse in favor of President Trump and not so much in favor of President Biden. But I think North Carolina, with this new idea of investments behind this state, prioritizing it as a top battleground, is the start of a trend that we will see amongst the Democratic Party in this election cycle and in future ones. I think North Carolina, while certainly not a state that I would go so far as to say has been neglected or treated as if it isn't a priority on the Democratic Party list here, but certainly has not been invested in as much as it has been recently, and also Democrats have restructured nearly their entire leadership team in the state Democratic Party. And I think that's a good thing right now for the Democratic Party, as they now look at the state in a new practical lens. With President Biden aiming to make it a top battleground state, this also coincides with tens of millions of dollars that is expected to be allocated from the Biden campaign to the state of North Carolina, expected to be spent on things like field offices and, ground campaign and volunteer work, all of these things that are necessary in a battleground state. Biden is willing to invest in the state of North Carolina. And that might be surprising, especially given our national numbers today don't exactly show President Biden in the strongest position. Right now, Donald Trump leads in all of the swing states from Nevada to Arizona to Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Iowa, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and Texas, which means that if he wins every other state that he won in the 2020 presidential election, at this point I'm just going to fill in the map here because I think that's the best, way to get through it fast enough. If he wins all of the states that he won in the last election cycle, you find end districts because he won Maine's 2nd district, Donald Trump gets around 312 electoral votes. Now that's very good for the Republican Party. They see that and they say, this is exactly what we want in the 2024 election. And, they aren't wrong for wanting that, obviously. I mean, these are states that they have been trying to win since the 2016 election, states they haven't been able to crack, like Nevada, states that they want to maintain and hold on to, that they had won back in 2020, like Iowa and Ohio and Florida, and then expand into states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Arizona. And so these are states here that I think, while in unison right now are voting for Donald Trump based on what the polls are saying, North Carolina seems to stick out here as a state that Donald Trump and Joe Biden might be in for a lot more as we get closer to November, despite it being a state that might not be really that competitive by the end of the day. I think with the Biden campaign spending money in North Carolina, it will force the Trump campaign to as well. Right now, they say the Trump campaign isn't worried yet, but of course, these numbers are expected, largely at least, to narrow. The numbers I'm referencing are Donald Trump's lead over Joe Biden by 4.4% in this battleground state. Now, I will say, with caution here, that this is a state that has historically overestimated Democrats, but in the most recent election cycle actually overestimated Republicans. The North Carolina Senate election in 2022 ended up with Ted Budd winning in North Carolina by just 3.2%. It was a margin here that honestly was a bit surprising, especially given that the National Democratic Party did not invest in Cheri Beasley's race. The National Democratic Party did not put as much effort into North Carolina as they did other battleground states, and that was reflected in the eventual results, with Ted Budd easily winning this election, but might otherwise have been more competitive if it was a different year. And I get it, allocation of resources is always scarce in a midterm year, especially when you think you are playing defense here, but I think what Biden is trying to do is not make this mistake. When the Democratic Party was spending all of their money on states like New Hampshire, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, and trying to, at most, expand into states like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, they neglected to realize that North Carolina still fundamentally is a swing state, right? Cheri Beasley came within 3.2% of winning a Senate race in a year where arguably the GOP could have been doing significantly better. And back to that point about polling data and who was expected to win, When you take a look at what we've seen in terms of the numbers, Ted Budd was up by Real Clear Politics by 6 points, FiveThirtyEight by 4 points, 270 to win by 5 points, on average up 5.1%. That ended up being around 3.2%. And so right now, if the numbers are showing President Trump ahead by 4.4, it might narrow down to roughly a 2-point advantage for Donald Trump, which still makes sense, but it gives, more validity behind the reason why Biden might be investing in this state. I think what we're seeing here is that everybody is writing off North Carolina because the numbers right now aren't as strong as they were for Biden back in 2020. But we forget to realize that 2022 exists as well, and North Carolina was not immune to this overperformance or overestimation of Republican support in a battleground state. From what was Real Clear Politics at 6, cut in half down to 3, tells us something that you might not be able to pick up if you're just looking at the high level and surface level takeaways of these polls, and I think it's certainly something to value. North Carolina is a state that you've seen now Biden and Harris most recently visit. They went yesterday to North Carolina. They are now investing their time in this state. They're getting President Obama up across the country, President Clinton up across the country. They're touting healthcare. They're touting Obamacare. They're making an effort here in North Carolina, in a state that many Republicans seem to think is an automatic Trump lock. And while it might be still, at the end of the day, a Trump victory here, the Trump campaign is absolutely going to be spending tens of millions of dollars to keep it red, while also worrying about the possibility that Biden might pick up other states, right? North Carolina might be, in a way, a distraction for the Trump campaign. I don't know if they're necessarily going to go for it immediately, but I can tell you by the time we reach the election, they will have spent tens of millions of dollars in this battleground state. Now, the 2020 presidential electoral map, I think, also doesn't exactly spell out confidence for the GOP in North Carolina. I mean, looking at the shifts from 2016, you see that a lot of counties, especially the suburban counties, did, in fact, shift towards the left. A lot of the rural counties, you did see improvements for Donald Trump relative to the last election cycle, similar to what we've seen in a bunch of other states. But the driving factors here and the driving vote count comes from these suburban areas, these urban areas that did, in fact, shift towards the left. And so I think Biden is targeting this state also in the event that the election starts turning in his favor, right? We just talked about how new polls are showing Biden up in Wisconsin, up by 1 point there, in Pennsylvania up by 5 points, according to Susquehanna, now a tie in Michigan, according to the most recent poll out of that state. And so these numbers here are starting to piece together a potential victory for President Biden, a potential, win of 270 electoral votes. And should the map become more Democratic, more blue, Georgia starts going blue, Arizona starts going blue, Nevada starts going blue, where is it that Biden does have the opportunity of expanding the electoral map? I genuinely don't think it is anywhere but North Carolina. Biden is not going to win Texas. He's not going to win Ohio. He's not going to win Iowa. And he's certainly not going to win Florida after that most recent election cycle. And I think you can quote me on that. I do believe that those states are locked in right now, barring some major intrusion from the courts or the judicial system here that, finds Donald Trump guilty, finds Donald Trump to be, guilty by a jury of his peers. Sorry, that was a lot to get off. So I think looking at these states, looking at this circumstance in which you do see those states become competitive, become within the reach for Biden here, would take a lot more than the simple maneuvering of an election. But now that we're in this maneuvering of an election, North Carolina becomes the easy target for possibility of being a state that Biden might be able to win. And I don't think it's just about this election, though. I think it's about many future elections where the Democratic Party looks at it and says, this might be a state worthwhile to invest in 28, in 32, and you need to start now. It feels very similar to what you saw with the governor's races back in 2018. When you saw Stacey Abrams lose to Brian Kemp and she devoted her time going into the 2020 election and said, I might have lost this election, but I'm going to set up the strategy and, the field work and the organizing work. And I'm going to make Georgia a blue state come the 2020 presidential election. And with all of that backing and with all of that enthusiasm, she turned Georgia from red to blue. And that isn't to say, that this is entirely because of her. President Biden uniquely appealed to suburban voters in the state, but she was a driving force for black and brown voters in the Atlanta metro region, in the Savannah region of the state, in regions, Augusta, right, where you do see high proportions of minority voters that Stacey Abrams uniquely was able to tap into in 2018 that translated into tapping into them in 2020. And so seeing that from 2018 to what happened on the presidential just 2 years later tells me that there certainly is some worthwhile impact of investing in a state early. I also think Democrats might be eyeing up North Carolina, not for this election and the presidential, but the upcoming Senate election. That could be quite interesting, right? You look at the 2026 Senate elections, North Carolina is up. And in that state, guess who you have? You have Senator Tom Tillis, who right now does not seem like he's going to be running for re-election. He very well may be primaried in the 2026 Senate election in North Carolina. And so for right now, he's leaving it up in the air. More often you find that these senators don't announce their bids immediately, but I do think he's probably on his way out. But of those who have filed paperwork, right? You have potentially Roy Cooper, who is the governor of North Carolina, Wiley Nickel, who was a U.S. representative and is a U.S. representative from the 13th district before it was redrawn to now be a Republican district here. But you have Democrats that are already fielding this race, and maybe, just maybe, they're setting up the strategy work for in the event that Biden wins or loses North Carolina. They have resources, they have templates, they have a strategy for this state. Whether it wins or loses is yet to be seen, but it will be very interesting to see the long-term effects of a major political party effort to win this state in a way that seems to be more involved than 2020 and 2016 included. I think North Carolina has served at a unique point for the Democratic Party as consistently being a prime target that almost always ends up falling flat on their faces, right? Always ends up, coming up in a position where they don't do tremendously well. But we will see what happens in this battleground state. I think Biden focusing on North Carolina also shows that he isn't just limiting himself to his 2020 electoral map. I think that's also a major concern that many Democrats had, that Biden and his campaign would realize there's pathways to 270 without every single one of these states on the map. And while that is entirely true, it doesn't mean you don't go on the offense. No major political party in modern electoral history has not gone on the offense in at least one or two states in the election cycle. And so it would be a history if the Biden campaign only set up field offices in the Big Six. The Big Six is often what you see the most talked about and discussed, competitive states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and everyone else writes everything off. But the Biden campaign and President Biden himself does not write off North Carolina. And I do think, too, negligence and this sense or false sense of security can sometimes lose you an election. And while North Carolina may not be a state that's similar to the blue wall from 2016, where Hillary Clinton got complacent, thought Wisconsin was in the bag, didn't visit the state once after the convention, thought Pennsylvania was in the bag because the Democratic convention was held there, thought Michigan would be in the bag until the final 2 weeks of the campaign season, North Carolina might be that, but flipped for Republicans. A state where they don't invest in, they don't spend time visiting, they don't think is going to be that competitive. And what I will tell you is, never underestimate Democratic support in a state where enthusiasm and outreach are at a low for Republicans. North Carolina could be exactly that. And so for the 2024 cycle, I would just keep my eye on North Carolina because it's 16 electoral votes. And if it does flip blue, it would actually be major history. The last time I told you that North Carolina went blue in a real, strong way was in 1976. And even then, you saw that in 1976, it was an 11-point margin for Jimmy Carter over Gerald Ford. Fast forward to 2008, the last time North Carolina went blue, it was 0.33%. It was 14,000 votes. North Carolina voted to the left of Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Florida. And while today that may not be possible, voted to the right of all of those states. May not be possible, especially given how Ohio is red, Iowa's red, Indiana even is red. Crazy to think about that. It was blue back then. Florida is red. I mean, North Carolina was so reluctant to choose President Obama, and they did, but barely. And then in 2012, voted for Mitt Romney by 2 points, and in 2016 for Trump by 4 points, then back in 2020 by 1.3%. So there probably are many ways and many reasons why Biden is targeting North Carolina. The numbers here don't look super strong, but they certainly have narrowed up over the past couple of weeks. We saw at 1 point Trump was up by 7.5, then 6, then 6, then 6, then 5, and now it's 4. And so the numbers are reverting and Biden is increasing and Trump is decreasing. But it doesn't mean that this is absolutely going to be a Biden state, absolutely going to be one that they can even really compete in a major way. I would be shocked if North Carolina flipped blue in 2024, and while it may not be entirely out of the realm of possibility, it certainly is not likely. But that doesn't mean Biden is willing to give up, and I think it goes to show that his strategy extends beyond his 2020 presidential election victory, something that I think many other Democrats might be in opposition to, that many Democrats are happy about as well. It really does split down the party as to who's happy about whether or not he's investing in states like North Carolina or Florida or Texas. And so North Carolina, all eyes on that state, especially with Anderson Clayton, the new party chairwoman, who is 25 years old in a battleground state, and she's expected to do very, very well. And time will tell exactly how well this coming November. But right now, Democrats are looking to this as a prime opportunity to flip the state of North Carolina new youthful leadership. And we will see if it happens. I think Democrats are hopeful it might. And clearly, so is President Biden. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.